The massive alien ship moved through space like a dark mountain. Its hull stretched for miles, covered in weapons that could destroy entire cities. Inside the ship's command center, Admiral Kethvar stood before a giant screen showing the blue, planet Earth. His red eyes studied the small world that orbited a yellow star. Kethvar had conquered 14 star systems for the Zephyrian Empire. Each time, the process was simple. His ships would arrive, make demands, and wait for surrender. Some species tried to fight, but they always lost quickly. The Empire's technology was too advanced, their numbers too great. Send the message to all human communication systems. Kethvar ordered his communications officer. His voice was deep and cold, like metal scraping against stone. On Earth, President Jake Morrison sat in the emergency meeting room deep beneath the White House. The room was filled with his top military, leaders, and scientists. Everyone looked worried as they watched the alien message appear on the main screen. The alien admiral's face filled the screen. His skin was gray like old rock, and his eyes glowed red in the darkness. When he spoke, his words were translated into perfect English by advanced computers. People of Earth, I am Admiral Kethvar of the Zephyrian Empire. Your small world now belongs to us. You have 72 hours to surrender completely. If you accept our rule, you will become workers in our mining colonies. Your lives will be spared, though you will serve the Empire forever. If you refuse, we will destroy every city, every ship, every trace of your existence. Choose wisely. The screen went dark. The room stayed silent for several long seconds. General Lisa Parker was the first to speak. She was a tough woman who had served in 3 wars. Mr. President, we need to face reality. We have 12 ships in our entire fleet. The aliens have over 300 ships out there, each one bigger than anything we've ever built. Admiral Rick Coleman nodded his agreement. He commanded Earth's small navy and knew their limitations better than anyone. Our weapons can't even scratch their hull armor. Their shields can stop our most powerful missiles. If we fight them in space, we'll lose in minutes. President Morrison looked around the table at his advisors. These were good people, smart people, but they all wore the same expression of defeat, all except one. Dr. Emma Rodriguez sat at the far end of the table. She was young for such an important position, but her work at the Advanced Warfare Research Division had earned respect from everyone in the room. She raised her hand slowly. Mr. President, may I speak? Morrison nodded. Go ahead, Doctor. Rodriguez stood up and walked to the front of the room. She pressed a button and the screen showed images of human history. Pictures of ancient battles, modern wars, and soldiers from different time periods filled the display. The aliens are making a mistake, she said. They think we're like the other species they've conquered, but we're not. General Parker frowned. What do you mean? Rodriguez clicked to the next image. It showed a small group of Greek soldiers facing a massive Persian army. 300 Spartans held off hundreds of thousands of enemy soldiers. They knew they would die, but they fought anyway. They made the enemy pay for every step forward, and I clicked again. The screen showed soldiers in a frozen city fighting house by house against an overwhelming force. Stalingrad. The Germans had better weapons, more soldiers, better supplies, but the Russians refused to give up. They fought for every building, every room, every staircase. The Germans won many battles, but they lost the war. Admiral Coleman shook his head. Those are inspiring stories, Doctor, but this is different. We're talking about aliens with technology centuries ahead of ours. Rodriguez smiled for the first time since the meeting began. That's exactly why we can win. She clicked to a new image showing a timeline of all the species the Zephyrians had conquered. Look at this pattern. Every species they defeated fought the same way. They tried to match the Empire's technology. They built bigger ships, stronger weapons, better defenses, and they all lost because the Empire is better at conventional warfare. Morrison leaned forward. What are you suggesting? We don't fight their kind of war, Rodriguez said. We fight our kind of war, the kind of war that humans have been fighting for thousands of years. We make them pay for every victory. We make sure that conquering Earth costs them so much that they can't afford to hold it. Meanwhile, in space near Jupiter, Captain Sam Hughes floated in the command center of the battleship Liberty's Edge. His ship was one of Earth's 12 warships, and like all of them, it was tiny compared to the alien vessels. Hughes and his crew were watching broadcasts from the alien fleet. The transmissions showed the Zephyrians' previous conquests, beautiful crystal cities of the Veltar civilization, now turned into mining operations with the survivors working as slaves. Underwater cities of the aquatic Mordoon, their elegant spires replaced by industrial processing plants. "Captain," said Lieutenant Danny Martinez, the ship's communications officer, "every species they show fought the same way. Big fleets trying to match the Empire ship for ship." Hughes nodded slowly. He was a career military man who had studied every major battle in human history. And they all lost because they played by the Empire's rules. "What do you mean, sir?" Hughes turned to face his crew. "Look at those battles again. Every conquered species tried to fight honorably. They protected their civilians, avoided unnecessary casualties, followed rules of war. They fought like civilized beings." He pointed at the screen showing the destroyed alien cities. "But humans aren't civilized when our survival is at stake. We're the species that developed concepts like total war, scorched earth tactics, and mutually assured destruction. We're the only species crazy enough to destroy our own cities rather than let the enemy have them." Back on Earth, Commander Kate Sullivan was working in the intelligence center, trying to intercept alien communications. She had been a computer programmer before joining the military, and her skills with technology were valuable now. After hours of work, she managed to break into the Zephyrian communication network. What she found surprised her. The aliens were sharing tactical information about their battle plans, and they weren't even trying to hide it. "They're completely predictable," she told her team. "They follow the same attack patterns they've used for decades. Formation flying, direct assaults, overwhelming firepower concentrated on military targets." She pulled up the tactical data on her screen. "They've never fought an enemy that doesn't follow conventional military doctrine. They don't know how to handle guerrilla warfare, terrorist tactics, or suicide attacks." Captain Paul Henderson, her commanding officer, looked at the data. "You think we should fight dirty?" Sullivan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Captain, we're about to fight for the survival of our entire species. There is no such thing as fighting dirty when extinction is the alternative." As the deadline approached, President Morrison prepared to address the world. He stood before cameras that would broadcast his message to every human settlement in the solar system. Behind him stood the flag of Earth, a blue banner with a simple image of their home planet. "My fellow humans," Morrison began, 72 hours ago, aliens demanded our surrender. They told us we could live as slaves or die as free people. They think they're giving us a choice, but they don't understand humanity." He paused and looked directly into the camera. "We've never been a species that accepts slavery. We've fought wars against our own people to end slavery. We've died by the millions to preserve freedom. And we've never, in all our history, surrendered when our children's future was at stake." Morrison's voice grew stronger. "The aliens have superior technology, more ships, and greater numbers. They've conquered 14 other civilizations using these advantages, but they've never fought humans before." He stepped closer to the camera. "They wanted to know what humanity is capable of when cornered. They're about to find out. We reject their ultimatum. Earth will never surrender." The broadcast ended, but the message continued to spread across human space. On military bases and civilian shelters aboard the small fleet of Earth ships, people heard their president's words and understood what they meant. The war was about to begin, and humanity was going to fight it their way. Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the countdown timer reach 0. 72 hours had passed since he delivered the ultimatum to Earth. The humans had rejected his offer of slavery, choosing death instead. This disappointed him, but it did not surprise him. Many species made the same foolish choice. "Begin the demonstration," he ordered his weapons officer. The target was Luna Base, humanity's largest settlement beyond Earth. 50,000 humans lived and worked there, mining minerals and conducting research. The base represented humanity's greatest achievement in space exploration. Kethvar chose it specifically to show Earth what resistance would cost them. 3 Zephyrian destroyers moved into position around the moon, their weapons charged with deadly energy that could melt rock and metal. The attack lasted only minutes. When it ended, Luna Base was gone. 50,000 humans died instantly, turned to ash by alien weapons. On Earth, President Morrison and his staff watched the destruction through satellite feeds. The room was silent as they saw their people die. General Parker closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Admiral Coleman clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. "They murdered civilians," whispered Dr. Rodriguez. "They could have attacked our military bases first, but they chose innocent people." Morrison nodded grimly. "They want us to be afraid. They want us to surrender out of fear." Commander Sullivan looked up from her communication station. "Sir, we're receiving a message from Captain Hughes aboard the Liberty's Edge." The main screen flickered and showed Captain Sam Hughes on the bridge of his ship. Behind him, his crew was preparing for battle. Every person on screen looked calm and determined. "Mr. President," Hughes said, "my squadron is ready to respond to the attack on Luna Base. We know the odds, sir. We know what this mission means." Morrison felt his throat tighten. Hughes was talking about a suicide mission. "Captain, you don't have to do this. We can find another way." Hughes smiled slightly. "Sir, they killed 50,000 of our people to send a message. Now we need to send them a message back. We need to show them what happens when you murder human civilians." 6 ships launched from Earth's orbital stations. They were small compared to the Zephyrian fleet, but they moved fast and with purpose. Captain Hughes led them in the Liberty's Edge, followed by 5 other vessels commanded by volunteers who knew they would not return home. The alien fleet detected the approaching human ships immediately. Admiral Kethvar watched the tactical display with mild interest. 6 tiny ships against his 300 vessels seemed like madness. "Should we destroy them now?" asked his tactical officer. Kethvar shook his head. "Let them approach. I want to see what the humans think they can accomplish with such a small force." The human ships flew directly into the center of the Zephyrian formation. This confused the alien commanders who expected the humans to try some kind of clever tactical maneuver. Instead, the small ships aimed straight for the largest enemy vessels. Captain Hughes opened a communication channel that reached both fleets. His voice was calm and clear as he spoke his final words. "This is Captain Sam Hughes of the Earth Defense Force. You came to our system and murdered our people. You thought we would surrender out of fear. You were wrong. Remember us." The Liberty's Edge slammed into the side of Admiral Kethvar's flagship at full speed. At the moment of impact, Hughes detonated his ship's fusion reactor. The explosion tore through the alien dreadnought's hull, causing massive damage and killing hundreds of crew members. The other 5 human ships followed the same tactic. Each captain chose a large enemy vessel and crashed into it while detonating their reactor. The explosions lit up space like small suns, destroying or badly damaging 13 Zephyrian ships. Admiral Kethvar found himself thrown to the floor of his bridge as his ship shook from the explosion. Emergency lights flashed red and damage reports flooded in from all sections. His flagship was still operational, but barely. "Damage report," he demanded as he climbed back to his feet. "Hull breach on decks 12 through 18, reported his engineering officer. "We've lost primary weapons, shields are down to 30%, and we have over 200 casualties." Kethvar stared at the tactical display in shock. No civilized species had ever used suicide attacks against his fleet. The concept was so alien to Zephyrian thinking that they had no defense against it. "They destroyed themselves just to hurt us," he said quietly. "They traded 6 ships for 13 of ours. On Earth, Dr. Rodriguez was already implementing the next phase of humanity's plan. She had spent weeks studying Zephyrian psychology and military doctrine. Now she was ready to introduce them to something they had never encountered before. Rodriguez had hacked into the alien communication network using technology captured from their scout ships. Now she could broadcast directly to every Zephyrian vessel in the fleet. What she sent them changed everything. The aliens found their screens filled with images from human history. They saw footage from World War II, showing soldiers fighting to the death rather than surrender. They watched recordings of kamikaze pilots crashing their planes into enemy ships, They observed scenes from the Pacific Theater, where Japanese soldiers chose death over capture. But the most disturbing images came from humanity's wars against itself. The aliens saw the siege of Stalingrad, where humans fought each other house by house, room by room, never giving up despite impossible odds. They watched footage from Vietnam, where guerrilla fighters used improvised weapons and suicide attacks against a technologically superior enemy. The message that accompanied these images was simple. This is what we do to each other. Imagine what we'll do to you. Commander Kate Sullivan was coordinating the evacuation of Earth's major cities while preparing defensive positions. Unlike other species the Zephyrians had conquered, humans were not trying to save their infrastructure. Instead, they were preparing to destroy it. Every major building in New York has been rigged with explosives, reported Lieutenant Colonel Gary Peterson. If the aliens try to occupy the city, we can deny it to them completely. Sullivan nodded. What about the civilians? Most have been evacuated to underground shelters or to the outer colonies. The ones who stayed behind are volunteers who want to fight. In Denver, Lieutenant Colonel Danny Wright was training civilian volunteers in guerrilla warfare tactics. These were not soldiers, but ordinary people who refused to flee their homes. They were teachers, mechanics, doctors, and shop owners who had decided to fight for their world. Remember, Wright told a group of 50 volunteers, "We're not trying to win fair fights. We're trying to make the enemy pay for every step they take on our soil. Every alien who dies on Earth is one less alien who can fight our fleet." A middle-aged woman named Carol Martinez raised her hand. She had been a high school principal before the invasion began. What if they have families just like us? Wright looked at her seriously. Ma'am, they chose to come here and try to enslave us. They killed 50,000 of our people just to scare us. Whatever families they have, they should have thought about them before they decided to make war on humanity. The first Zephyrian scouting party landed near Denver 3 days after the Luna Base massacre. They expected to find frightened civilians hiding in their homes. Instead, they found a city turned into a fortress. The aliens moved carefully through the empty streets, confused by the silence. Their sensors detected human life signs throughout the city, but they could not see anyone. This made them nervous, though they did not understand why. The attack came from everywhere at once. Windows exploded outward as humans fired improvised weapons. Manholes exploded as booby traps detonated beneath alien feet. Buildings collapsed as demolition charges brought tons of concrete down on the invaders. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, 200 Zephyrian soldiers were dead. Only 30 humans had died, most of them volunteers who stayed behind to detonate final charges that brought down entire city blocks on top of advancing aliens. Major Amy Foster led the final phase of the Denver defense. As alien reinforcements arrived, she activated the nuclear device hidden beneath the city center. Her last transmission reached military headquarters just before the explosion. This is Major Foster. Denver is lost, but we made them pay. Tell Earth Command that we took 200 of them with us. Tell my kids that Mommy fought for their future. The nuclear explosion destroyed what remained of Denver, along with 300 more Zephyrian soldiers who had just arrived as reinforcements. The aliens had won the battle, but at a cost that shocked their commanders. Admiral Kethvar received the battle report while his flagship was still being repaired. He read it 3 times before he believed what his officers were telling him. They destroyed their own city rather than let us have it, he said to his staff. They killed themselves just to kill more of our soldiers. His tactical officer looked confused. Should we avoid attacking their cities? Kethvar stared at the tactical display showing Earth. The small blue planet seemed to mock him with its peaceful appearance. No, we continue the invasion. But send a message to High Command. Tell them we need reinforcements. He paused, then added words that had never appeared in any previous conquest report. The humans fight like nothing we have encountered. They seem to prefer death to defeat. The news spread across the galaxy faster than anyone expected. On the water world of Aquatica Prime, enslaved Mordoon workers huddled around hidden communication devices in their underwater factories. They whispered about the burning ones who chose death over slavery. Felana pressed her crystalline ear against the metal wall of her prison cell. Through the vibrations in the structure, she could hear other Veltar prisoners talking in their secret language. The words they used were new to their vocabulary, borrowed from human broadcasts that somehow reached their mining colony. "The small mammals fight back," whispered one voice through the wall. "They burn their own cities rather than surrender them," came another reply. "Perhaps we have forgotten how to be free," said a third voice, older and sadder than the others. Felana had been a diplomat before the Zephyrians conquered her world 15 years ago. She remembered negotiations, peace treaties, and civilized discussions. But she also remembered the day her beautiful crystal cities were destroyed, and her people were forced into the dark mines to dig precious metals for their conquerors. Now, she was hearing about a species that refused to negotiate, refused to surrender, and refused to accept slavery as their fate. The humans were showing the galaxy something that most species had forgotten. Sometimes fighting was better than living, on your knees. Captain Tony Chen floated in the command center of his stealth ship, Ghost Runner. His vessel was one of the newest additions to Earth's defense strategy. Instead of fighting the main Zephyrian fleet directly, Chen and his crew hunted supply ships and support vessels. "Target acquired," reported Lieutenant Sarah Kim from the sensor station. "Zephyrian supply convoy, 3 ships carrying food and ammunition to their forward bases." Chen studied the tactical display. The enemy ships were large and well armed, but they were not expecting an attack in this remote part of the solar system. "Load the special packages," he ordered. The special packages were modified mining ships packed with nuclear warheads. Earth's engineers had stripped out everything unnecessary and filled the cargo holds with the most powerful weapons humanity could build. These unmanned ships looked harmless on alien sensors, just like the cargo vessels that regularly moved between human colonies. Chen's crew guided the disguised weapons toward the Zephyrian convoy. The alien ships detected the approaching vessels but saw no threat. Mining ships were common throughout human space, and these appeared to be abandoned, drifting without power. The Zephyrian commander decided to capture the derelict ships. His crew could salvage useful materials and perhaps learn more about human technology. It was a fatal mistake. When the alien boarding parties were halfway between their ships and the mining vessels, Chen triggered the nuclear devices. 3 explosions lit up space, destroying the entire convoy and everyone aboard. The Ghost Runner slipped away before reinforcements could arrive. "Mission accomplished," Chen reported to Earth Command. "Another supply line cut. The aliens are going to have trouble feeding their forward bases." Similar attacks were happening throughout the solar system. Captain Lisa Roberts led raids against Zephyrian communication stations. Major Frank Wilson's team destroyed alien fuel depots. Commander Pete Jackson hunted isolated patrol ships, using human knowledge of asteroid fields and space debris to set ambushes that the aliens never saw coming. Each successful attack hurt the Zephyrian war effort, but more importantly, each victory showed the galaxy that the mighty empire could be defeated. The psychological impact was spreading far beyond Earth's solar system. On the crystal mining world of Gamara 7, something unprecedented was happening. Veltar workers were refusing to report for their shifts. Instead of going to the mines, they gathered in hidden chambers deep beneath the processing facilities. Elder Kethara, who had lived through the original conquest of her world, stood before a crowd of 200 workers. Her crystalline body was scarred from years of hard labor, but her voice was strong. "The Burning Ones have shown us the way," she said in the ancient Veltar language that their guards could not understand. "They have proven that the Empire can bleed." "But we have no weapons," protested a younger worker named Telvan. "The Zephyrians have guns and armor. We have only our mining tools." Kethara's eyes glowed with an inner light that had been dimmed for 15 years. "The humans fight with whatever they have. They turn their cities into weapons. They use their ships as bombs. We can do the same with our tools." The rebellion began at dawn. Veltar workers emerged from the mines carrying equipment that was supposed to extract precious crystals from rock. Instead, they used crystal cutters as weapons and mining charges as bombs. The Zephyrian guards were caught completely off guard. The battle for Crystal Processing Plant Number 7 lasted 12 hours. When it ended, the facility was in Veltar hands. 300 alien soldiers were dead, killed by beings they had considered weak and harmless slaves. The victory inspired similar uprisings across 17 different worlds. Species that had been conquered decades ago suddenly remembered how to fight. They used human tactics, surprise attacks, booby traps, and sacrificial assaults that cost the defenders dearly, but hurt the Empire even more. Dr. Emma Rodriguez was monitoring these rebellions from her command center deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. She had created something that military historians would later call the most effective propaganda weapon in galactic history: the Heritage Archive. "Are we ready to broadcast?" she asked her technical team. Lieutenant Commander Brian Walsh nodded from his position at the communications console. "All systems are operational. We can reach every communication device in Zephyrian space." Rodriguez had spent months assembling the Heritage Archive. It contained the complete military history of humanity, focusing on battles where smaller forces defeated larger ones through determination and unconventional tactics. The Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans held off a massive Persian army. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, where poorly armed civilians fought trained soldiers for weeks. The Siege of the Alamo, where defenders chose death over surrender. But the archive also contained something more disturbing: footage of what humans did to their enemies when they were truly angry. The bombing of Dresden, where an entire city was turned to ash. The atomic destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where single weapons killed hundreds of thousands. The systematic destruction of entire armies during the March to the Sea. "Begin transmission," Rodriguez ordered. The Heritage Archive flooded alien communication networks across the galaxy. Zephyrian commanders found their screens filled with images of human warfare that seemed impossible to believe. They watched soldiers charging into certain death, civilians fighting trained armies with improvised weapons, and cities burning rather than surrendering. The message that accompanied these images was simple but terrifying. "This is our history. This is what we do when we're angry. You have made us very angry." Major Amy Foster's sacrifice in Denver had not been forgotten. Her final transmission inspired similar defensive actions across Earth. When Zephyrian forces landed near Mexico City, they found every building rigged with explosives. When they tried to capture the industrial centers in Germany, the factories exploded rather than fall into alien hands. Colonel Danny Wright was now training volunteers in the Australian outback. His students were no longer just civilians from major cities. Farmers, miners, truck drivers, and shop owners had traveled thousands of miles to learn how to fight for their world. "The enemy expects us to protect our infrastructure," Wright told a group of 50 new recruits. "They think we'll try to save our buildings, our roads, our power plants. They're wrong. We're going to use everything as a weapon." Mary Johnson, a cattle rancher from Queensland, raised her hand. "What about our families, our homes?" Wright's expression was grim but determined. "Ma'am, if we don't stop these aliens here, our families won't have homes to go back to. They'll be slaves working in alien mines. Everything we're destroying can be rebuilt. Our freedom can't." The psychological impact on Zephyrian forces was becoming critical. Admiral Kethvar received daily reports from his medical officers about a new condition affecting his troops. Soldiers were having nightmares about humans who laughed while dying. They jumped at shadows, convinced that every piece of debris might be a bomb. Some refused to enter human buildings, afraid that the structures would explode around them. Dr. Sektar, the fleet's chief medical officer, submitted a report that worried the admiral. "The condition is spreading through our ranks like a disease. The soldiers call it human syndrome. They've developed an irrational fear of the enemy that goes beyond normal combat stress." Kethvar read the medical reports with growing alarm. His soldiers described humans who seemed to enjoy fighting impossible battles. They talked about enemy commanders who detonated their own positions rather than retreat. They reported civilians who attacked armed soldiers with kitchen knives and farming tools. "How can we fight an enemy that considers death a victory?" one traumatized soldier had asked the medical staff. The admiral had no answer to that question. The breakthrough came when Dr. Rodriguez's intelligence team achieved something unprecedented. They managed to hack directly into the Zephyrian command network using captured communication equipment. 3 months after Captain Gary Mitchell's sacrifice, the Zephyrian Empire was falling apart from the inside. What had begun as a simple conquest of one small planet had become a galaxy-wide disaster that threatened the very existence of their civilization. Admiral Kethvar stood alone on the bridge of his damaged flagship, staring at reports that seemed impossible to believe. The Veltar had liberated 15 worlds using human guerrilla tactics. The Mordun had turned their underwater cities into centers of rebellion that could not be conquered. Even the peaceful Kindari, enslaved for 40 years, had learned to fight with a fury that matched humanity's example. "Admiral," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving another distress call from the Kepler system. The Veltar. Rebels have seized the primary mining facility. They're using modified crystal cutters as weapons and mining charges as bombs." Kethvar closed his eyes and tried to remember when everything had started going wrong. It seemed like a lifetime ago that he had delivered a simple ultimatum to the small blue planet called Earth. He had expected quick surrender, followed by the usual process of turning another species into slaves. Instead, the humans had taught the galaxy how to burn. "What about our reinforcements from the Fifth Fleet?" Kethvar asked. "Diverted to suppress the uprising in the Centauri colonies," came the reply. "The Mordun have flooded 6 mining stations and are using the water as a weapon against our troops." The Mu Admiral walked to his tactical display and studied the map of Zephyrian territory. Red symbols marked active rebellions across 23 different star systems. Yellow symbols showed worlds where unrest was growing. Green symbols representing secure Imperial holdings were becoming rare. "How many troops do we have available for combat operations?" he asked his staff. "Less than 30% of our total force," reported his tactical officer. "The rest are committed to suppressing rebellions or protecting critical infrastructure." For the first time in his long military career, Admiral Kethvar understood what defeat looked like. The Empire was not losing because their enemies had better weapons or superior technology. They were losing because they had awakened something in the galaxy that could not be put back to sleep. The humans had shown every enslaved species that freedom was possible, and now that knowledge was spreading like wildfire across the stars. On the liberated world of Aquatica Prime, Velana swam through the crystal-clear waters that surrounded her people's ancient cities. For the first time in 15 years, the Mordun were free to live in their natural environment without alien overseers watching their every move. She carried a message that had traveled across the galaxy from Earth. The transmission was simple, but powerful. "To all free peoples of the galaxy, humanity stands with you. We have shown that empires can fall. Continue the fight." Velana gathered the Council of Elders in the great underwater amphitheater that had been forbidden to her people during the occupation. The massive chamber filled with thousands of Mordun who had never seen their leaders speak freely. "The Burning Ones have given us a gift," Velana announced to the assembled crowd. "Not weapons or technology, but something far more valuable. They have given us hope." She activated a holographic display that showed the current state of the galaxy. Red zones marked areas of active rebellion. The pattern was spreading outward from Earth like ripples in a pond. 17 star systems are now free, she continued. 23 more are fighting for their freedom. The Zephyrian Empire, which seemed invincible for 3 centuries, is crumbling because one small species refused to kneel. The crowd listened in amazement as Velana described the human tactics that had inspired their own liberation. Suicide attacks that cost the enemy more than they could afford. Guerrilla warfare that made occupation impossible. Psychological warfare that broke the spirit of enemy soldiers. "We must not forget this lesson," she concluded. "Freedom is not given. It must be taken, and it must be defended with everything we have." Colonel Danny Wright stood in the ruins of what had once been Los Angeles. The city was gone, destroyed in the final battles between human defenders and Zephyrian occupation forces. But the sacrifice had been worth it. The aliens had paid such a terrible price for the city that they had been forced to abandon their invasion of North America. Wright was now training representatives from 12 different alien species in advanced guerrilla warfare techniques. The students included Veltar crystal miners, Morden deep-sea fighters, and even members of species that had been enslaved so long they had almost forgotten their original names. The key to asymmetric warfare, Wright explained to his mixed audience of humans and aliens, is that you don't need to win every battle. You just need to make sure the enemy loses more than they can afford. A young Veltar named Telvan raised his crystalline hand. But Master Wright, the Empire has millions of soldiers. How can small groups of rebels defeat such numbers? Wright smiled grimly. Because empires depend on fear to control their subjects. When people stop being afraid, when they start fighting back, the whole system begins to collapse. The Empire's strength comes from the belief that resistance is hopeless. Once that belief is broken, their real weakness is revealed. He gestured toward the ruined city around them. Los Angeles was home to 4 million people. The aliens killed most of them, but in the process they lost over 50,000 soldiers and had to abandon their entire invasion plan. That's the mathematics of freedom. Sometimes you have to pay a terrible price, but if you make the cost high enough, your enemies will decide that conquering you is not worth the effort. Dr. Emma Rodriguez was working in her new laboratory, built inside a mountain in what had once been Colorado. The facility was hidden from alien sensors, protected by miles of rock and sophisticated camouflage systems. Here, she was developing humanity's final gift to the galaxy. The Terran Codex is complete, she announced to her team. Every tactical manual, every psychological warfare technique, every piece of strategic knowledge that helped us defeat the Empire. We're going to broadcast it to every free world in the galaxy. The Codex was more than just a military manual. It was a complete guide to asymmetric warfare, written specifically for smaller civilizations facing conquest by technologically superior enemies. The document contained everything from basic guerrilla tactics to advanced psychological operations. Are we sure about this? Asked her assistant, Lieutenant Commander Steve Parker. If we give away all our secrets, won't future enemies be able to defend against our methods? Rodriguez shook her head. The whole point is that there shouldn't be any future enemies like the Zephyrian Empire. If every species in the galaxy knows how to fight back effectively, no empire will ever again be able to enslave entire civilizations. She activated the transmission system that would broadcast the Codex across the galaxy. Besides, the real secret isn't in the tactics themselves, it's in the willingness to use them. You can teach someone how to fight, but you can't teach them to choose death over slavery. That has to come from within. President Jake Morrison stood before the rebuilt United Nations Assembly in New Geneva. The city had been destroyed and rebuilt 3 times during the war, but each time the human survivors had refused to give up. Now representatives from 47 different species filled the Great Hall. 5 years ago, Morrison began, humanity faced extinction. An alien empire demanded our surrender, offering us the choice between slavery and death. We chose a third option. We chose to fight. The assembly listened in respectful silence as Morrison described the cost of that choice. Earth's population had been reduced from 8 billion to 800 million. Entire cities had been destroyed. Millions of people had died defending their freedom. But our sacrifice was not in vain, Morrison continued. Today, the Zephyrian Empire no longer exists. 23 star systems are free and more are joining us every day. The age of galactic empires is ending, replaced by an alliance of free peoples who have learned the most important lesson in the universe. Freedom is worth any price. The president activated a holographic display showing the memorial wall on rebuilt Luna Base. The wall contained the names of 3 million humans who had died in the war, but its inscription spoke not of death, but of hope. Here lie the defenders of Earth, who chose to burn bright rather than fade away. They taught the galaxy that some flames cannot be extinguished, and their fire still burns in every free world among the stars. Admiral Kethvar submitted his final report to what remained of the Zephyrian High Command. The once mighty empire now controlled fewer than a dozen worlds, and even those were under constant threat from rebellion. The human war has destroyed us, he wrote. Not through superior technology or greater numbers, but through the introduction of concepts that our civilization was not prepared to handle. The humans showed the galaxy that empires could be defeated, and now every enslaved species believes that freedom is possible. He paused in his writing, remembering the first time he had seen human tactics in action. The suicide attacks that made no sense according to Zephyrian military doctrine, the willingness to destroy their own cities rather than surrender them, the psychological warfare that had broken the spirit of his soldiers. 3 months after Captain Gary Mitchell's heroic sacrifice, the galaxy was burning with the flames of freedom. The Zephyrian Empire, which had ruled over countless worlds for 3 centuries, was collapsing like a house built on sand. Admiral Kethvar stood in the ruins of his command center, reading reports that filled him with despair. The Veltar had liberated 18 worlds using tactics copied from human broadcasts. The Morden had turned their underwater cities into fortresses that could not be conquered. Even the gentle Kindari, enslaved for 40 years, had learned to fight with deadly determination. "Sir," reported his communications officer, "we've lost contact with the mining stations in the Rigel system. The Veltar rebels have seized control of all 3 planets." Kethavar walked to the tactical display that showed the current state of his empire. Red warning lights covered most of the map. Each light represented a world in rebellion, a species that had learned the human way of war. "How many ships do we have left?" he asked quietly. "Less than 200 operational vessels," came the reply. "The rest are either destroyed or committed to fighting rebellions we cannot win." The admiral closed his eyes and remembered the first time he had seen humans fight. The suicide attacks that made no sense to Zephyrian military minds. The willingness to destroy their own cities rather than surrender them. The psychological warfare that had broken his soldiers' spirits. Now every enslaved species in the galaxy was using those same tactics. The humans had not just defeated the Empire militarily, they had taught the entire galaxy how to be free. On A, the water world of Aquatica Prime, former slave Velana swam through waters that ran red with Zephyrian blood. Her people had learned well from their human teachers. When the alien garrison had tried to suppress their rebellion, the Morden had flooded the mining tunnels and turned their underwater cities into death traps. Velana gathered the survivors of her species in the great coral amphitheater that had been forbidden to them during the occupation. Thousands of Morden filled the ancient chamber, their blue skin glowing with bioluminescent patterns that showed their emotions. "The Burning Ones have given us the greatest gift possible," Velana announced to the crowd. "They have shown us that empires can die." She activated a holographic display that showed the current state of the galaxy. The Zephyrian Empire, once a solid block of conquered territory, now looked like a piece of cloth full of holes. 25 star systems are now free, she continued. 30 more are fighting for their freedom. The empire that seemed invincible for 3 centuries is crumbling because one small species refused to kneel. A young Morden named Kolseth raised his fin. But Velana, the humans paid a terrible price. Most of their people died in the war. Velana's bioluminescent patterns shifted to show sadness mixed with determination. Yes, they did. But they chose to die free rather than live as slaves. And because of their sacrifice, our children will never know the taste of chains. Colonel Danny Wright stood in the ruins of what had once been Chicago. The city was gone, reduced to rubble by months of urban warfare. But the aliens had paid such a terrible price to take it that they had been forced to abandon their invasion of North America entirely. Wright was now training representatives from 15 different species in guerrilla warfare tactics. His students included crystal beings from the Veltar worlds, aquatic Morden fighters, and even members of species so long enslaved that they had forgotten their original names. The most important lesson, Wright told his mixed class of humans and aliens, is that you don't fight to win battles. You fight to make the enemy pay more than they can afford for every victory. A scarred Veltar warrior named Telvox asked, "Master Wright, but the Empire has millions of soldiers. How can small groups defeat such numbers?" Wright pointed to the destroyed cityscape around them. "Because empires depend on fear to control their subjects. When people stop being afraid and start fighting back, The whole system begins to collapse. He gestured toward a memorial wall that listed the names of Chicago's defenders. This city had 3 million people when the war started. The aliens killed most of them, but in the process they lost 60,000 soldiers and had to abandon their entire North American campaign. That's the mathematics of freedom. Sometimes you pay a terrible price, but if you make the cost high enough, your enemies will decide that conquering you isn't worth the effort. Dr. Emma Rodriguez worked in her new laboratory, built deep inside the Rocky Mountains. The facility was hidden from alien sensors and protected by miles of solid rock. Here, she was completing humanity's final gift to the galaxy. The Terran Codex is ready for transmission, she announced to her team. Every tactical manual, every psychological warfare technique, every strategic concept that helped us defeat the Empire. The Codex was more than just a military handbook. It was a complete guide to asymmetric warfare, written specifically for smaller civilizations facing conquest by technologically superior enemies. The document contained everything from basic guerrilla tactics to advanced methods of psychological operations. "Are we sure we should give away all our secrets?" asked her assistant, Captain Steve Wilson. "What if future enemies use this knowledge against us?" Rodriguez smiled as she prepared the transmission system. "The whole point is that there shouldn't be any future enemies like the Zephyrian Empire. If every species in the galaxy knows how to fight back effectively, no empire will ever again be able to enslave entire civilizations." She activated the broadcast system that would send the Codex to every free world in the galaxy. Besides, the real secret isn't in the tactics themselves. It's in the willingness to use them. You can teach someone how to fight, but you can't teach them to choose death over slavery. That has to come from the heart. President Jake Morrison stood before the newly formed Galactic Council in the rebuilt city of New Geneva. The hall was filled with representatives from 53 different species, all of them free for the first time in generations. 5 years ago, Morrison began, humanity faced a choice between slavery and extinction. We chose a third option. We chose to fight, and we chose to win. The assembly listened in respectful silence as Morrison described the cost of that choice. Earth's population had been reduced from 8 billion to less than 1 billion. Entire continents had been turned into battlefields. Millions of people had died defending their freedom. But our sacrifice was not meaningless, Morrison continued. Today, the Zephyrian Empire no longer exists. 28 star systems are free and more join us every day. The age of galactic empires is ending, replaced by an alliance of free peoples who have learned the most important truth in the universe. Activated a holographic display showing the memorial wall on Luna Base, which had been rebuilt as a symbol of human determination. The wall contained the names of 4 million humans who had died in the war. "Freedom is not free," Morrison said, reading the inscription carved into the memorial. "It must be earned through sacrifice, defended through vigilance, and shared with all who have the courage to claim it." Admiral Kethvar sat alone in his private quarters, writing his final report to the Zephyrian High Command. The once mighty empire now controlled fewer than 8 worlds, and even those were under constant threat from rebellion. The human war was not a military defeat, he wrote carefully. It was a complete transformation of galactic civilization. The humans introduced concepts that our empire was never designed to handle. He paused, remembering the first suicide attack he had witnessed. The human captain who had rammed his ship into a Zephyrian dreadnought while shouting, "Remember us." The civilians who had fought trained soldiers with kitchen knives and farming tools. The children who had thrown rocks at alien tanks. They taught every enslaved species that freedom was possible, he continued. They showed the galaxy that empires could be defeated through sacrifice and determination. They proved that some things are worth dying for. Kethvar sealed the report and prepared to send it. His final words would become famous throughout the galaxy, quoted by rebels and freedom fighters for generations to come. Never challenge humans. They don't fight to win wars. They fight to ensure their enemies lose everything. They will burn your empire to dust rather than accept defeat. The message was transmitted to the Zephyrian homeworld, but by the time it arrived, Admiral Kethvar had already surrendered his remaining fleet to the Galactic Defense Alliance. The war was over, but its legacy would last forever. 20 years After the first human ship had crashed into a Zephyrian dreadnought, children across the galaxy learned about the species that had changed everything. On the crystal world of Veltar Prime, a young student named Andra listened as her teacher told the story of the Burning Ones. The humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy, the teacher explained. They were not the smartest or the most advanced, but they had something that no empire could defeat. What was that? Asked Andra. They had the courage to choose death over slavery, and when they made that choice, they inspired every other species to make the same choice. The teacher activated a holographic display showing the current state of the galaxy.